Hello everybody, I tested about 9 or 10. I have been a massive fan of JRPGs and role-playing games in general. Pokemon had a huge impact on that, with games like Platinum or Black and White being the first JRPGs I would play, but games like Golden Sun, Boktai and Bravely Default would help capture my imagination, and later on, I learned about things like the Tales of series, Xeno, Valkyria Chronicles, Dragon's Dogma and Battle Network. But for most people, when you talk of JRPGs, they likely jump to either Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, and it's usually one or the other. Final Fantasy has sold over double the number of copies than Dragon Quest, so for most people around me, Final Fantasy was a series that got them into RPGs. But for me, I always preferred Dragon Quest style and whimsy. And while I haven't played all the games in this series, I've played enough for it to become my second favourite JRPG series. However, today I won't be experiencing much in the way of fun, because I'm playing DQ1. In 1982, the founder of a Japanese tabloid magazine transformed his company into the game software company then known as Enix, and to find talent for this company held a small contest for hobbyists to submit game ideas and concepts. Two of the winners of this competition were Koichi Nakamura and Shonen Jump writer Yuji Horii. Later, when Enix began developing for NES and Famicom, Nakamura's game called Door Door and Horii's visual novel, The Protopia Seal Murder Case, became Enix's first couple of games released for the system, with the port of Horii's visual novel being the first time he and Nakamura would work together on a project. And it was during the development of that port that the initial ideas for Dragon Quest would surface. Horii wanted to introduce RPGs to the Japanese market, as the genre was incredibly niche at that time, almost entirely limited to Western markets. He wanted to combine ideas from games like Ultima and Wizardry with his own previous works to create something more people could dive into. So with him as designer and writer, Koichi Nakamura as director tackling the programming, along with Koichi Sugiyama handling the music, Yuji Horii asked for the help of renowned manga artist Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball, to be in charge of the art. Initially, he wanted to reject the offer and was quite overwhelmed by how much art he had to make for the game, but his editor soon convinced him and he rather enjoyed the finished project. The game was released for the Famicom, MSX and MSX2 in Japan in 1986, but it wasn't released overseas until 1989, under the name Dragon Warrior, and that version had a lot of changes when localizing, with the dialogue being completely rewritten from a whimsical fantasy style to Elizabethan English, which makes things read very weirdly at times, along with Nintendo also wanting all risk-scare and religious connotations removed from the game. On top of that, the original Dragon Quest was also released on the Super Famicom, Game Boy Color, Wii, PS4 and 3DS only in Japan. An updated version of the Super Famicom release was put on Switch for all regions in 2019. I know this version isn't considered the definitive version of the game by some fans, but this is the version I'll be discussing, not only because it looks and runs better, but because it's the only release of the fucking thing in Europe. Yes, the first time in nearly 33 years. In fact, by the time the original Dragon Warrior released in America, Dragon Quest III was already out in Japan, and Europe wouldn't get a sniff of Dragon Quest game until Dragon Quest VIII for the PS2. But despite its importance to JRPGs, I have some less than nice things to say about the original Dragon Quest. Let's begin with the story. The kingdom of Eilifgard was devoured by unending darkness, until the hero Erdrick restored light to the realm by defeating a creature of pure evil. To keep the kingdom safe, Erdrick handed the Ball of Light to King Lorik, which has the power to repel beasts and keep winter shorter. But one man resented the Ball of Light and hid away where it learned magic and the ability to control dragons. The Dragon Lord soon attacked Eilifgard and stole the Ball of Light, causing them to turn toxic and for monsters to return outside the kingdom walls. Many years later, the Dragon Lord strikes again to capture Princess Gwaelin from the kingdom. Many adventurers will try to seek him out at his castle, Charlock, but all would fail, as the prophets predict only the descendant of Erdrick can come forward to defeat the Dragon Lord. This is where the game actually starts, and the player can name their own hero to defeat the Dragon Lord for themselves, but no one knows what happens in this story after the game starts. There is no real character development for any of the cast. You can't add anyone to your party, and NPCs have so very few things to say, but otherwise the player has two goals for the whole game: free the princess and defeat the Dragon Lord. When you meet with the Dragon Lord, the player actually has a choice to make: either fight to restore the world, or join him. If you join him, you get the bad ending, which for the longest time was considered non-canon until Dragon Quest Build in 2016 that actually plays off of the bad ending. For the main series though, the canon ending does come from beating the Dragon Lord. The hero reclaims the Ball of Light, restores Eilifgard, and King Lorik offers the kingdom to the hero. But he turns it down in hopes of finding his own kingdom with Princess Gwaelin, sowing the seeds for Dragon Quest II to take off. Also, every game in this series has their own version of the hero. They rarely have canonical names, and even when they do, it's more of a title of their name. Some fans have started calling the heroes simply by the number of the game they are associated with, like 4, 8 and 11, even if 11 looks more like 17 than 11. The story isn't up to much, which I guess I can understand for the time, but does fail to keep the player engaged at pretty much any point across their journey. You can argue that the game is simply very straightforward and in that regard, I do find it somewhat refreshing to have a very linear story in an RPG. A part of the reason I love Dragon Quest so much is that it uses a lot of fantasy tropes that, while cliche, I adore. The difference in Dragon Quest 1, it is literally just those tropes holding the entire narrative together. No one does anything in this game. The NPCs are absolute mannequins, and none of them have interesting or insightful dialogue outside of go here, do this. When you save the princess, all she does is retreat back to the main castle, and even the Dragon Lord just sits on his arse waiting for you. But maybe this game is more about the player's journey and their own personal narrative than an overarching plot. And if that was the aim for the original Dragon Quest, then it unfortunately doesn't quite hit the mark. Before I tear this game apart, let me discuss the command system. The command system is how the player manages all encounters in the game. The player instructs members of their party to perform an action. In this game, you choose to do one of 4 things per turn: attack, use magic spells, flee the encounter, or use an item, like medicinal herbs. Attack is using the hero's equipped weapon to strike the enemy. Magic spells can be used for an attack, but can also heal the player and apply some status effects to enemies if they land, while flee is used to escape the encounter if you don't want to fight right now. When the player has performed all their actions, it's the enemy's turn to act. Rinse and repeat until the encounter is over. This is how the entire series plays, with future games expanding on the command system to make it incredibly robust. And I imagine if you've played any JRPG, that all sounds familiar, because this is the game that made those tropes common, even for Final Fantasy, predating it by a year and a half. But in DQ1, this system is more bare bones than Winnie the Pooh's skeleton, and here's why. In this game, there's only one playable character, one class, a level cap of 30, no variations in playstyle, and about 8 hours of fighting the same enemies over and over again to get my numbers higher. This is unbelievably tedious to play through, and it's all the game is. Furthermore, the actual encounters in the overworld are stupidly simple. The option to flee is largely useless, as the only thing you can do between walking from place to place is fight to get experience and go to visit shops. Even if you're low on health and die, the only punishment for that is being sent back to the castle and losing half your gold, which, if you have the best equipment, is meaningless anyway. The only time the flee command is useful is when you're fully maxed out, by which time you have the Holy Protection spell to avoid encounters entirely. And at that point, every encounter in the game is stupidly easy. After about level 20, there really isn't anything to do other than finish the game. There are a few satisfying fights, mainly bosses, that I do enjoy. The bad thing is that even for an 8-hour game, which is short for a JRPG, at least 6 of those hours are just grinding till I get into a position to fight them. Yes, you can fight metal slimes to make the grind faster, but that isn't the issue. It's how dull that experience is when you're doing nothing but that. Caves and other dungeons are just more of the same, just hard to navigate than the world map. And the towns aren't exactly memorable. In fact, the 2 towns I do remember are Tantagel, because where the game starts, and ironically enough, Hawkness, the one that's intentionally deserted. I'm not a stranger to grinding in RPGs. Hell, I don't think DQ1 is the worst in the series for grinding, but it's just too damn simple for me to recommend it to someone who hasn't played an RPG before. Especially when playing an RPG, the thing I want the most is to be invested in the world I'm walking through. It's hard to be invested when all I'm doing is hammering my A button for a few hours. Where I can sing this game's praises is with its soundtrack, such as the main series overture, Venture Forth, the battle music, and the overworld, even if last was more so reluctantly with how much I heard it across my playthrough. I should state I'm listening to the orchestral soundtrack, not the 8-bit MIDIs, but the music for this series is simply incredible, and that started with Dragon Quest 1. Visually, it's hard for me to say. I absolutely love Akira Toriyama's art, and the remakes mobile and Switch use it in abundance, but there's something about it being a mobile port makes it look strangely cheap in areas, mainly with the interface. It's just a black box with a white border and stock font. I do really like this series, and Dragon Quest 1 is not a bad game. It's very important to the genre as a whole, but I can't recommend games just on their legacy. I review based on if they are worth playing now. It's why I think Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are still great games. It's why I'm so harsh to Mario Land and said Brawl was a bad competitive game. Fortunately for Dragon Quest, better days laid ahead. Dragon Quest 2 and 3 expand on everything that's brought forward here, and the series will be known as the turn-based RPG. While every other major RPG series will become more action-focused, even Final Fantasy abandoned its turn-based roots, Dragon Quest still uses the command system nearly 40 years later. If Dragon Quest 12 gets rid of it, I'll be kinda sad. Well, that ended up being more negative than I wanted it to, but if I ever end up reviewing another DQ game, I'm sure it'll be way more glowing than this one. Don't let my review impact your opinion of DQ1, if you do love it. Thank you very much for watching, and good night.